to obtain new contracts. So as far as I was concerned...
So you make no attempt to find out what other business interests he might have?
I had asked who you're working with, and he said at that stage, I've just set up on my own, I'm just starting my business.
And is this recorded?
I doubt it.
Thank you. Nicola Blackwood and then Michael Ellis. Nicola Blackwood.
Mr. FEDORCIO, when you asked Mr. Yates to conduct the due diligence, was that a normal process? Would you normally have asked Mr. Yates to conduct that due diligence? How did you select Mr. Yates for that?
Well, I was talking to Mr. Yates for two reasons. One, I knew that he, being new in post in the Specialist Operations Department, would particularly need some assistance at a senior level. And so part of this work would assist him in doing it, so I spoke to him about it, specifically because of his involvement in phone hacking. I was aware of the investigation, or in his case...
You thought it was a good idea for Mr. Yates to do due diligence on a new News of the World employee because he'd been investigating News of the World employees?
Mr. Yates is a senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police. I have no reason to doubt his integrity.
That wasn't what I asked. What I asked was, why did you select Mr. Yates to do due diligence on a new employee that you were considering a contract with?
Because in this case he was aware, or he had been leading the work on phone hacking, whatever was going on at the time, and I thought that was an appropriate place to do it.
When you selected him, were you aware that Mr. Yates had been a close friend of Mr. Wallace since 1998?
No, not since 1998.
Did Mr. Yates inform you that he had been a close friend of Mr. Wallace since 1998?
I've only, in the last few years, picked that up, but I
Do you think that...
Yes, sorry, Mr. FEDORCIO. In answer to Nicola Blackwood, could we have a precise answer? Did you know... You said to me previously you knew he was a friend of Mr.
I knew he was a friend,
Yates.
but I didn't know back until 1998.
Right,
that was the
but you knew he was a friend.
I knew he was...
At the time,
Neil
at the
Wallace.
time when you asked him to do due diligence, did you know that he was a close friend of Mr. Wallace?
I knew he had contact with Mr. Wallace. I couldn't say he was a close friend,
So
but I knew he was a close
did you
friend.
not think that it might not be appropriate for someone who was a close friend of a potential employee to do the due diligence exercise upon that potential employee? Do you not think it might have clouded his judgment?
I had no reason to doubt Mr. Yates.
Despite his integrity, it might have put him in a difficult position had he discovered something.
I have no reason to doubt Mr. Yates'
It's not about his integrity, it's about the position which he might have been put in that position.
I don't believe he was put in a position like that.
It's about your integrity and how you
appreciate
appoint
that.
people, not about Mr. Yates' integrity. We will make our own conclusions on that. Miss Blackwood is asking you, do you think, in hindsight, you did the right thing?
I think with hindsight, which I know a number of my colleagues from the Met over the last week have said to you, lots of things would have been done differently. If
No, but
we'd
in
known
respect to
then
the
what we
appointment of
know
Mr.
now.
Wallace, would you reappoint him knowing what you know now?
Certainly not.
Mr. Ellis.
Who recommended Mr. Wallace to you? You say you had a recommendation before
Yes,
you took him on.
I'd been out, I'm trying to think, in mid-August, I discovered that he was now working independently.
Was it someone from the News of the World or from News International?
Not that I honestly cannot recall who said it.
You
I
can't
speak to a lot of
recall,
people.
despite the scrutiny on this matter, and despite obviously having given it some careful consideration, you can't recall who suggested that you hire Mr. Wallace.
But at the end of the day...
Was it Rebecca Brooks?
Certainly not.
Was it anybody else at News International?
Not to my knowledge.
Would you describe yourself as...
Remember, so in answer to Mr. Ellis's question, it could have been someone at News International, because you said you can't remember.
I said I can't remember, but I do not believe it was...
Mr. Ellis, final question.
Were you particularly close to the News of the World or News International? Did your closeness, if you were close to them, cause friction with press officers under your control?
I read that suggestion in today's paper.
Yes.
Which I am dismayed about, to be honest. The comments that they make suggest that I was placing stories with them. I must admit, I placed stories with all sorts of papers and all sorts of journalists.
Were you placing stories, were you giving preference to the News of the World in placing stories?
Certainly not. In many occasions, you would know that different papers have different interests in different subjects,
Thank you.
and you seek to operate with those.
Did you know that Mr. Wallace's daughter worked at the Met?
I didn't until yesterday.
And that was the first time?
Yes.
Mr. Wallace's contract ended when?
His contract was terminated on the 7th of September 2010.
Is it not the case that he was offered another contract?
Yes.
When was he offered the second contract?
The situation with my deputy, as I said, continued. He wasn't coming back. So I had the first contract. I reviewed
And
at the end of that period.
look at your notes, please,
Yes.
if you would, so we get this absolutely right. How long did the first contract run?
The first contract ran until the 31st of March 2010.
Now, when did it start and when did it end?
The contract was issued on the 1st of October.
And it ended?
That one on the 31st of March.
And is it correct that he was offered
Sorry, can I correct myself? The contract, I think, had a long potential date, but that was, I'd said that initially 7 months with the option of an extension.
Right. So the 1st of October to the 31st of March.
Yes.
And he was offered another contract on the 1st of September.
He was offered an extension before the 1st of April for 6 months, to take him through to the end of August. He was then on the 1st of September offered another 6-month extension. But things accelerated in a few days after that, if I could explain. Fine. I think the 1st of September, the New York Times article appeared
Indeed.
on the other side of the Atlantic, so that came out over here later in the day. Over the following few days, the story developed, I think, in some ways, which operationally led Mr. Yates to make some statements about looking at some certain factors.
And then you terminated the
And
contract.
I, on the evening of the 6th of September, reviewing the news coverage, I was determined that I need to take steps to end the contract, and I intended to do it the next morning. I actually received an email from Mr. Wallace just after 10 o'clock on the evening of the 6th, saying, with what's going on here, I fear this is going to embarrass you, and I don't want to do that, so I wish to suspend the contract.
So you didn't terminate it, he volunteered to terminate it?
He got there by a couple of hours ahead of me, getting to him to say, I'm sorry, this is the end. So I accepted his proposal and terminated the contract.
Can you clear up one other point in respect to the letter that you sent us concerning Andy Heyman?
Indeed.
Mr. Heyman has made it very clear that before he went to meetings, dinners, etc. with News International, that he spoke to you and that you said it was fine for him to go to these meetings. Could you, for the record, explain your position?
Certainly, and I'll try and do this briefly, Chair, if I may.
Well,
I think
if you could.
I need to take this in reverse order, as it were, the way I wrote to you. That the first I became aware of phone hacking taking place was when I returned home from a period of leave in August 2006. The only dinner that I attended with Mr. Heyman and representatives of News International during or before that was in April 2006, which was while the investigation was ongoing. I attended that dinner with no knowledge whatsoever of the phone hacking investigation taking place.
And Mr. Heyman didn't tell you that the investigation was happening?
No.
Even before the dinner?
No.
Did you go to the dinner together?
Yes.
And he didn't mention it on the way?
No.
That he was doing a major investigation into phone hacking?
No. It would have been inappropriate for me to be told. I'm not briefed on operational matters until I need to know.
But were these matters not in the newspapers?
No, it was totally secret. It was only it became public on the arrest.
But
of
you never
Goodman and Mulcair.
you never advised Mr. Heyman not to attend any dinners with News International?
I'm not while there was a live investigation going on into them, no.
We have a final question from Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. Is it correct that you actually employed Mr. Wallace before your deputy became ill?
No. My deputy became ill in the middle of February 2009.
Your deputy became ill in 2000?
Yes,
Thank you.
he went off.
We have a brief question for Mr. Clapperson.
This is on a different subject, which I've pursued already with a previous witness.
Okay, but if it's brief...
Yeah, it's very brief. I asked the Commissioner about the number of lunches and dinners which he'd had with News International organisations, particularly News of the World. And he told me that there was a strategy whereby you were trying to reach out to newspapers with a particularly high percentage of the market. I think he said 40% for News International. Were you aware of this strategy?
I think the use of the word strategy is not the word I would accept. I deal with all of the media, and I need to deal with all of the time. So the News of the World were, the News International group of papers are a significant part of that, so naturally we would spend amount of time with them.
Since then, I've seen a list of the hospitality accepted by the Commissioner, and as far as lunch or dinner are concerned, not awards ceremonies or parties or things like that, but lunch or dinner, which I think you agree is particularly significant, it would appear, and I might be wrong about this, but I've only had a cursory look, that he only ever went to lunch or dinner with News International organisations, particularly the News of the World. What was the strategy for reaching out to, say, people like myself who reads the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror?
Well, I would...
Not at the same time, though. Mr. FEDORCIO?
They have reasons as well, I think.
Yeah,
If we could have a quick response.
My experience is that each news outlet have their own ways of meeting commissioners or senior police officers. Some prefer dinners, some prefer lunches, some prefer meetings in the office, some prefer it over sandwiches, some prefer it over coffee, some prefer it with nothing. You go with the mood. This is something that has been in place since I started in the Met, and it's something I inherited.
Mr. FEDORCIO, thank you very much for coming in to give evidence. I'm not sure we're any clearer at the end of this session than we were when we started, and we may be writing to you again about these matters, but thank you for coming. Order, could we have our final witness, John Yates?
Well, Dick FEDORCIO there, ending his evidence with the words from Keith Vaz saying, I'm not sure we're any clearer now than when we started. We may be writing to you again. So kind of Keith Vaz once again doing what he did to John Yates last week, expressing his dissatisfaction with some of the evidence that he heard. And we see there on the screen there, with hindsight, I wouldn't have appointed Neil Wallace, the former deputy